A dog's life hangs in the balance as a desperate race against time unfolds in a Wyoming shelter, hope flickering. Welcome to Paws Verve. Please subscribe channel for more heart-touching stories. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot of the Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter, a low brick building on the outskirts of Casper, Wyoming. Inside, the air was thick with the sharp tang of disinfectant and the anxious chorus of barking dogs, each voice a plea for attention in a place where hope was as scarce as space. The clock above the reception desk, its face smudged with years of neglect, ticked relentlessly towards 6 p.m. In Kennel K12, tucked at the end of a dimly lit corridor, a border collie mix named Storm pressed himself against the cold concrete wall. His patchy black and white coat, marred by uneven tufts where fur refused to grow, gave him a ragged appearance. But it was his eyes, one a piercing blue, the other a startling green, that set him apart. They flickered with a mix of terror and resignation, as if he sensed the finality of the red tag clipped to his cage. Euthanasia scheduled 6 p.m. Storm's file, a thin manila folder on the director's desk, told a grim story. Labeled a problem case, he was described as skittish, unapproachable, and prone to trembling when anyone came near. His heterochromatic eyes and uneven coat made him a curiosity, but not the kind that drew adopters. Families wanted fluffy, puppies or sleek dogs with predictable charm, not a lanky, odd-looking creature who flinched at raised voices. The shelter staff, overworked and stretched thin, had given up on him. Behind closed doors, they called him the ghost dog, a nickname born of his silent, haunted presence. Too broken to fix, the assistant manager had muttered during a morning meeting, and the decision was made with the cold efficiency of necessity. The shelter was at capacity, with 6 new dogs arriving tomorrow from a hoarding case in Cheyenne. Space had to be cleared, and Storm, deemed unadoptable, was the easiest choice. Mia Torres, a 19-year-old college student and weekend volunteer, felt her stomach twist as she checked the euthanasia list pinned to the bulletin board. Storm's name stared back at her, the red ink as stark as a wound. She'd spent weeks trying to reach him, sitting cross-legged outside his kennel with a pocket full of treats, her voice soft as she coaxed him with promises of safety. Once, she'd caught him watching her, his blue eye glinting with something like curiosity, but he'd never come closer than the back wall. Mia knew his fear wasn't aggression, but the shelter's director, Mr. Larson, disagreed. "Large breeds with behavioral issues are a liability," he'd said, his tone final. "We can't keep what we can't place." Now, with less than an hour until the vet tech prepped the syringe in the back room, Mia stood frozen in the kennel corridor, her sneakers scuffing the worn linoleum. Storm's green eye met hers through the bars, and for a moment she thought she saw a plea, a spark of something unbroken beneath the fear. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, buddy." She'd tried everything, extra time after her shift, quiet songs to calm him, even sneaking him bits of her sandwich. But it wasn't enough. The shelter's rules were ironclad, and her voice, young and powerless, carried no weight against the bureaucracy of survival. Desperate, Mia pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she opened the shelter's social media page. She snapped a photo of Storm, his mismatched eyes glowing in the dim light, his body curled tight as if to make himself smaller. The words came in a rush as she typed, "This is Storm. He's scheduled to be euthanized at 6 p.m. today because he's scared and looks different. He's not aggressive, just terrified. He deserves a chance. Please, someone save him. Sagebrush Haven, Casper, WY." She hit post, her heart pounding as the image uploaded, a last-ditch cry into the void of the internet. She didn't expect much. Most of her posts got a handful of likes, maybe a sad emoji, but she couldn't let Storm's life end without a fight. Back in the reception area, the shelter's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the chipped linoleum. The front desk phone rang unanswered. The staff were too busy with intake forms and cleaning cages. Mia glanced at the clock, 5:45 p.m. Her shift was over, but she lingered, unable to leave Storm to his fate. She busied herself straightening flyers, her eyes darting to the front door with every creak, hoping for a miracle she knew was unlikely. The shelter was a revolving door of animals. Some saved, many lost, and Storm was just one more in a system that couldn't afford sentimentality. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled, rattling the shelter's loose windows and carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant snow. The plains stretched endlessly beyond the parking lot, a vast, unforgiving landscape where survival demanded resilience. Storm, with his trembling frame and mismatched eyes, seemed out of place in this harsh world, yet there was something in his gaze, a quiet strength, a will to endure, that Mia couldn't ignore. She checked her phone again, refreshing the post. A few likes, a heart emoji, a comment. Poor pup. Nothing more. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of helplessness settling in. Then, with 10 minutes to spare, the shelter's glass door swung open with a force that startled Mia. A woman strode, thin, her boots clicking against the floor, her presence commanding despite the lines etched into her weathered face. Clara Bennett, 50 years old, wore a faded denim jacket and carried the faint scent of pine and earth, as if she'd just stepped off a trail in Yellowstone. Her grey-streaked auburn hair was pulled into a loose braid, and her hazel eyes burned, with determination. She'd seen Mia's post while scrolling on her phone at a gas station 30 miles away, and something about Storm's eyes had stopped her cold. Clara, a wildlife biologist who'd spent decades studying wolves, recognized the look of a creature cornered by fear but not yet defeated. "I'm here for the dog in K-12, Clara announced, her voice steady as the granite cliffs she'd climbed in her work. "The border collie mix, Storm." Mia blinked, caught off guard. "Ma'am, he's scheduled to—" "I know what he's scheduled for," Clara cut in, her tone brooking no argument. "And I'm here to stop it." The air in the shelter seemed to shift, the weight of inevitability cracking under Clara's resolve. Mia's heart leapt, a flicker of hope igniting as she fumbled for the adoption paperwork. Storm, unaware of the woman who'd just altered his fate, remained pressed against his kennel wall, his mismatched eyes watching the world that had so far offered him only rejection. But in that moment, as Clara's boots echoed down the corridor toward him, the first threads of a new story began to weave, a story of trust, healing, and the kind of love that could mend even the most broken spirits. The fluorescent lights of Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the chipped linoleum floor as Clara Bennett stood at the reception desk, her presence like a gust of Wyoming wind cutting through the stale air. Her hazel eyes, sharp, with purpose, locked onto Mia Torres, the young volunteer who clutched a stack of adoption forms as if they were a lifeline. The clock on the wall read 5:52 p.m., its relentless ticking a reminder that Storm, the border collie mix in kennel K-12, had only minutes left before his scheduled euthanasia. Clara's denim jacket was dusted with the faint red earth of the plains, and her boots bore the scuffs of countless trails through Yellowstone. At 50, she carried the quiet authority of someone who'd faced down blizzards and grizzlies, but it was the fire in her gaze that made Mia believe this woman could change everything. "I'm here for the dog in K-12, Clara repeated, her voice low but unyielding, like the steady rumble of a distant storm. "Storm, the one you posted about." Mia's hands trembled as she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. He's still here." She glanced toward the corridor leading to the kennels, where Storm's fate hung in the balance. "But the director, Mr. Larson, he's already approved the procedure. It's happening soon." Clara leaned forward, her weathered hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Then get me to Larson. Now." Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of someone who'd spent years negotiating with nature's unforgiving rules. Mia hesitated, then scurried toward the back office, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. Clara remained rooted, her eyes scanning the shelter's sparse lobby, faded posters about spaying and neutering, a donation jar half filled with coins, a bulletin board cluttered with flyers for lost pets. The place felt like a holding cell for hope, and Clara's chest tightened at the thought of Storm trapped within it. Moments later, Mia returned with Mr. Larson, a heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a clipboard tucked under his arm. His expression was a mix of exhaustion and skepticism, the kind worn by someone who'd long ago stopped believing in miracles. "Ma'am," he began, adjusting his glasses, "I understand you're interested in the dog in K-12, but I need to be clear. That animal is not adoptable. He's got severe behavioral issues, fearful, potentially aggressive. We've had him for weeks and no one's been able to handle him." Clara's gaze didn't waver. "I've handled wolves in the wild, Mr. Larson. I think I can manage a scared dog." Her words were calm, but there was steel beneath them, forged from years of tracking elusive predators across rugged terrain. "I saw the post. I know what's scheduled for 6 p.m. I'm here to take him home." Larson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not that simple. We have protocols, liability concerns. This dog's been rejected by every adopter who's seen him. His appearance alone, those eyes, that coat, puts people off. And with his behavior, we can't risk his appearance. Sessionals are part of his genetic makeup, not some arbitrary standard." Clara's voice grew sharper now, cutting through Larson's excuses. "You're telling me he's being put down because he doesn't look the part, because he's scared? That's not a reason. That's a failure of imagination." The director's mouth tightened, but Clara didn't back down. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I'm a wildlife biologist with 20 years studying canine behavior. I've got a ranch outside town, plenty of space, and a vet on speed dial. I'm not some impulsive do-gooder. I know what I'm signing up for, and I'm signing up for Storm." Larson glanced at Mia, who stood wide-eyed, clutching the forms. The volunteer's hope was palpable, a silent plea that mirrored the desperation Clara had felt when she'd seen Storm's photo on her phone an hour ago, refueling at a gas station on her way back from a fieldwork stint. Those mismatched eyes, one blue, one green, had stopped her cold, not because they were odd, but because they held the same wary intelligence she'd seen in the wolves she studied. She'd driven 30 miles at breakneck speed, her old pickup rattling, propelled by a gut instinct she couldn't explain. This dog, labeled a ghost, was no monster. He was a survivor, and she'd be damned if she let him die for being different. Larson shifted uncomfortably, sensing the resolve in Clara's stance. "Even if I wanted to approve this, there's paperwork, background checks, and frankly, we don't have the staff to babysit a high-risk adoption today." "Then I'll wait," Clara said, folding her arms. "And if you're worried about publicity, I've got contacts at a few conservation magazines who'd love a story about a shelter's rush to euthanize a dog someone's willing to save." It was a calculated bluff. Her connections were real, but she hated playing that card. Still, the threat landed. Larson's jaw clenched, and after a long pause, he nodded toward Mia. "Get the forms ready. But I'm warning you, Ms. Bennett. This dog's on you. Any issues, and it's your responsibility." Clara gave a curt nod, her focus already shifting to the kennel corridor. "Lead the way," she told Mia, who practically bounced with relief as she guided Clara toward K-12. The shelter's cacophony, barks, whines, the clatter of metal gates faded into the background as Clara's boots echoed down the hall. She wasn't thinking about the paperwork or Larson's warnings. She was thinking about Storm, about the fear in those eyes, and the promise she'd made to herself as she'd sped toward Casper. "You're not alone anymore." At the end of the corridor, Mia stopped before a kennel marked limited access. In the dim light, Clara saw him, Storm pressed against the back wall, his patchy coat blending with the shadows, his body taut as if braced for a blow. His blue eye caught the light first, then the green, both fixed on her with a wariness that felt like a challenge. Clara's heart ached not with pity but with recognition. She'd seen that look before, in creatures who'd learned the world was cruel but hadn't yet given up on it. "Hey, Storm," she said softly, crouching to his level, her voice steady as the Wyoming plains. "I'm Clara. I'm here to get you out of this place." Storm's story began in the spring of 2023, in a sagging barn on the outskirts of Casper, Wyoming, where the air was heavy with the stench of damp straw and neglect. The barn belonged to Hank Grayson, a man whose name was whispered with disdain among local animal lovers. His operation, Grayson's Best Buddies, was a puppy mill masquerading as a reputable breeding business, churning out designer dogs for pet stores and online buyers. The barn's splintered walls hid a grim reality. rows of wire cages stacked floor to ceiling, each holding a dog whose life was measured in litters and profit. It was here, in a cramped, rusted cage, that Storm came into the world, the smallest of a litter of border collie mixes born to a weary mother named Daisy. From the moment he opened his eyes, Storm was different. While his siblings developed the sleek black and white coats typical of their breed, Storm's fur grew in patches, a mottled mix of coarse black and sparse white that left parts of his skin exposed. His eyes were the real anomaly, one a vivid blue, the other a striking green, giving him an otherworldly gaze that unsettled anyone who looked too long. Hank Grayson, a man with a temper as short as his patience, inspected the litter daily, his heavy boots thudding against the barn's dirt floor. When he saw Storm, his lip curled in disgust. "What the hell is this?" he'd muttered to his assistant, a wiry teenager named Kyle. "Looks like a damn mutant." Hank's business thrived on uniformity. Pet stores wanted puppies that matched breed standards with predictable looks and temperaments that sold easily to suburban families. Storm, with his patchy coat and mismatched eyes, was a liability, a flaw in Hank's carefully curated product line. "He's no good for show dogs or working lines," Hank grumbled, shoving Storm's cage to the back of the barn. "Might as well be a stray." The words, casual and cruel, set the tone for Storm's early life. While his siblings tumbled over each other in a shared pen, learning to play and socialize, Storm was isolated, his cage too small for anything but curling into a tight ball. Daisy, weakened by back-to-back pregnancies, could only nudge him through the bars, her soft whines the only comfort Storm knew. The barn was a place of constant noise, yips, whimpers, the clatter of metal feed bowls. But for Storm, it was a world of silence and shadows. Human hands were rare and rough, appearing only to toss in meager portions of kibble or hose down the cages, the cold water stinging his thin fur. Kyle, the assistant, was kinder than Hank, sometimes sneaking Storm an extra scrap of food, but even he kept his distance, wary of the puppy's strange eyes. "So you're going to be trouble," Kyle would mutter, not unkindly, as he passed by. Storm learned to flinch at sudden movements, to cower when voices rose, his body absorbing the lesson that the world was a place to fear. By 8 weeks, when puppies were typically shipped to pet stores or sold online, Storm's siblings were gone, their cages filled with the next litter. Hank had no buyers for Storm. "Nobody's going to pay for that one," he told Kyle, his voice thick with irritation. "Those eyes creep people out, and that coat's a mess. Ain't worth the food he eats." Hank considered drowning him, a quick fix he'd used before for defective pups, but Kyle's uneasy glance made him reconsider. Instead, one moonless night, Hank loaded Storm's cage into the back of his rusted pickup and drove to the Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter. 30 miles away, the shelter was a last resort, a place where Hank could dump unwanted dogs without questions. He parked in the lot, his headlights off, and carried Storm's cage to the night drop-off kennel, a concrete box outside the main entrance. "Found him on my land," Hank lied to the tired attendant who met him, his face shadowed by a baseball cap. "Might be feral or something. Got those weird eyes, probably dangerous." The word feral was a death knell in rural Wyoming, where stray dogs were often assumed to be threats to livestock. The attendant, overworked and used to vague stories, didn't press for details. Storm was processed as a stray, possible aggressive tendencies, his paperwork a patchwork of assumptions that sealed his fate. Inside the shelter, Storm's world shrank to the confines of Kennel K-12. The concrete floor was cold, the air sharp with the scent of fear and disinfectant. The constant barking overwhelmed him, each sound a jolt to his already frayed nerves. Shelter staff, influenced by Hank's warning and Storm's skittish behavior, approached him cautiously, using a pole to slide food through the bars. When a worker tried to pet him, Storm's trembling escalated to a low growl, a desperate attempt to protect himself. The worker scribbled fear aggression on his chart, another nail in the coffin of his chances for adoption. For weeks, Storm existed in a haze of isolation, his mismatched eyes tracking the comings and goings of other dogs, puppies adopted, older dogs led to the back room, never to return. The shelter's volunteer, Mia, was the only one who saw past the labels. She noticed how Storm's ears twitched when she spoke softly, how his green eye followed her movements with a glimmer of interest, but her efforts were a drop in the bucket against the tide of the shelter's reality. By the time Clara Bennett stormed through the door, Storm had been in K-12 for nearly a month, his body thinner, his spirit teetering on the edge of surrender. Yet those eyes, blue and green, like fragments of sky and forest, held a spark, a quiet defiance that had survived neglect, rejection, and the looming threat of a needle. It was that spark that had caught Clara's attention in Mia's desperate post, pulling her across 30 miles of Wyoming plains to stand before his kennel ready to rewrite his story. Clara Bennett knelt before Storm's kennel in the dim corridor of Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter, her hazel eyes locked on the trembling border collie mix who pressed himself against the back wall. The shelter's cacophony, barks, whines, the clatter of metal gates, faded as she studied his mismatched gaze, one blue eye like a frozen lake, the Ikif the other green like a Wyoming meadow. It was 5:55 p.m., and Clara knew she had mere minutes to secure Storm's future, but in that moment, time seemed to pause. She saw not a broken dog, but a creature whose spirit mirrored her own, a survivor shaped by loss, yet still standing. Clara's resolve to save Storm wasn't just about the dog. It was about redeeming a piece of herself, a mission rooted in the quiet wounds she carried from a life of solitude and second chances. At 50, Clara was a woman forged by the wild places she'd called home. For 2 decades, she'd tracked wolves. Through Yellowstone's rugged backcountry, her days spent decoding their howls and paw prints, her nights filled with the hum of stars and silence. Her work as a wildlife biologist had earned her respect in academic circles, but it came at a cost. Relationships frayed under the weight of her long absences. Her marriage to a kind but distant rancher unraveled a decade ago, leaving her with a cabin full of echoes and a heart she'd learned to guard. The death of her mentor, Dr. Helen Voss, 3 years prior had been the final blow, a loss that left Clara unmoored, questioning the point of her solitary path. She'd returned to her hometown of Casper 6 months ago, seeking not just a fresh start, but a way to reconnect with the world she'd held at arm's length. Clara's connection to animals ran deeper than science. Wolves, with their fierce loyalty and unspoken codes, had taught her more about trust than most humans ever could. She saw in them a resilience that resonated with her own. Her childhood had been a patchwork of foster homes, each move teaching her to rely on herself. Animals, unlike people, didn't judge or abandon. They simply were, and Clara found solace in their honesty. When she'd scrolled through her phone at that gas station and saw Mia's post about Storm, his haunted, heterochromatic eyes pierced through her carefully built walls. They weren't just different. They were a mirror to her own guarded soul, wary yet yearning for someone to see beyond the surface. Saving Storm was more than an act of compassion. It was a reckoning. Clara had spent years documenting the struggles of wild creatures advocating for their survival, but this was personal. Storm's rejection for being wrong echoed the times she'd been told she didn't fit. Too headstrong, too independent, too unwilling to play the social games that smoothed human connections. His fear wasn't a flaw, but a testament to what he'd endured, and Clara recognized it because she'd lived it. The puppy mill, the isolation, the label of unadoptable, they were the world's verdict on a being who hadn't been given a fair shot. Clara had clawed her way out of her own dark places. Now she'd be Storm's lifeline, proving that worth wasn't defined by others' blindness. Her ranch, a modest spread of sagebrush and rolling hills 10 miles outside Casper, was more than a home. It was a sanctuary she'd built for herself, and now it would be Storm's. The idea of a dog hadn't been part of her plan. Her life of unpredictable fieldwork and long hours didn't scream pet owner. But as she crouched before Storm's kennel, Clara felt a certainty she couldn't shake. This wasn't about obligation or pity. It was about partnership, about 2 souls who'd been discarded finding their way together. She imagined Storm running through her fields, his patchy coat catching the wind, his eyes bright with the freedom she'd fought for in her own life. The vision was so vivid it ached, a future where they'd heal each other step by cautious step. Clara's motivation was also fueled by defiance. The shelter's director, Mr. Larson, had dismissed Storm as a lost cause, just as Hank Grayson had tossed him aside for profit's sake. Clara had no patience for systems that wrote off the unconventional, that valued ease over potential. She'd faced that mindset in academia, where her blunt honesty and unconventional methods raised eyebrows, and in her personal life, where her choice to prioritize her work over family left her labeled as cold. Storm was her stand against that narrative. She'd prove them wrong, not just for Storm, but for every overlooked soul who'd been told they didn't belong. As Mia fumbled with the adoption forms behind her, Clara's mind raced with practicalities. She'd need to consult Dr. Emily Carter, the local vet who'd treated her horses, to address Storm's physical and emotional scars. She'd rearrange her schedule, cutting back on field work to give Storm the stability he'd never had. The challenges were daunting, his fear, his lack of socialization, the time it would take, but Clara thrived on hard things. Wolves had taught her patience, the slow art of earning trust. Storm deserved nothing less, she whispered to him through the bars, her voice soft as the dusk settling over the plains. "We're going to figure this out, you and me. No one gets to decide your worth but us." Storm's ears twitched, his green eye catching hers, and for a fleeting moment, Clara felt the stir of something sacred, a bond forming, fragile but fierce. That would redefine them both. The air in the kennel corridor of Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter was heavy with the scent of disinfectant and the sharp edge of animal fear, but Clara Bennett barely noticed. She crouched before Storm's kennel, her denim jacket brushing the cold linoleum, her hazel eyes fixed on the border collie mix who cowered against the back wall. Storm's patchy black and white coat seemed to blend with the shadows, but his heterochromatic eyes, one blue, one green, glowed with a wary intensity that held Clara's gaze. It was 5:57 p.m., and though she'd just secured his release from the shelter's euthanasia list, the real work was only beginning. Behind her, Mia Torres hovered, clutching a clipboard with adoption forms, her breath catching as she watched. The woman and dog face each other. For Clara, this moment wasn't about paperwork or victory. It was about forging the first thread of trust with a creature who'd known only betrayal. Clara's voice when she spoke was low and melodic, like the wind rustling through Wyoming's sagebrush plains. "Hey, Storm," she said, keeping her body still, her hands resting loosely on her knees. "I know this place is loud and scary. I know you've had a rough go of it. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere until you're ready." She didn't reach through the bars or make sudden movements. Years of studying wolves had taught her the language of patience, how a direct stare could threaten, how stillness could invite. Storm's blue eye flickered, his green one narrowing slightly, as if weighing her words against a lifetime of harsh lessons. The kennel was small, its concrete walls stained with years of use, its metal bars unyielding. Storm's body was taut, his legs tucked beneath him, his tail curled tight against his side. Every line of him screamed retreat, yet his eyes never left Clara's face. She saw the fear, but also something else, a spark of curiosity, a faint question in the tilt of his head. It reminded her of a young wolf she'd once observed in Yellowstone, separated from its pack, watching her from a ridge with the same guarded hope. That wolf had eventually rejoined its family. Storm, she vowed, would find his own kind of home. Mia shifted nervously, glancing at the clock. "Ms. Bennett, the director said we need to move fast. The vet tech's already prepping the... No?" Her voice faltered, unable to say euthanasia. Clara nodded without turning, her focus unbroken. "We've got time, Mia. Storm's calling the shots here." She settled onto the floor, crossing her legs, making herself smaller, less imposing. The linoleum was cold through her jeans, but she ignored it, her attention wholly on the dog who held her future as much as she held his. Minutes ticked by, the shelter's din a constant backdrop, barks echoing, a mop clanging in a distant bucket. Clara began to speak again, her voice a steady stream of calm. "I've got a place outside town, Storm. It's quiet, just the sound of wind and maybe a coyote or two at night. There's a big field where the grass grows tall and a creek that runs cold even in summer. I think you'd like it there." She didn't talk down to him, didn't use the sing-song tone people often reserved for pets. She spoke as if he could understand every word, as if he were a partner in this conversation. And perhaps he was, because Storm's ears twitched, his green eye softening ever so slightly. Clara's heart thudded not with fear but with the weight of possibility. She'd faced plenty of challenges, blizzards that stranded her in the backcountry, grant proposals that kept her up until dawn. But this felt different. Storm wasn't a project or a puzzle to solve. He was a living being who'd been failed by the world, and she was determined to be the one who didn't let him down. She thought of her own failures, the relationships she'd let slip away, the solitude she'd embraced as armor. Saving Storm wasn't just about him. It was about proving she could connect, that she could be enough for someone who needed her. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Storm shifted. His nose twitched, catching Clara's scent. Pine, earth, a hint of the coffee she'd spilled on her sleeve during her frantic drive. His blue eye blinked and he inched forward, his belly low, to the ground, as if testing the air between them. Mia gasped softly, but Clara held up a hand, signaling silence. "That's it," Clara murmured, her voice barely audible. "You decide, Storm. I'm right here." She kept her gaze soft, slightly averted, letting him feel the space to choose. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The shelter's clock edged past 6 p.m., but Clara's earlier standoff with Mr. Larson had brought them this moment. Storm's movement was slow, deliberate, each step a battle against the fear etched into his bones. When he was a foot from the bars, he paused, his green eyes searching Clara's face. She smiled, not with teeth, but with the gentle curve of someone who understood what it meant to be afraid. "You're braver than they know," she told him. "Braver than me, maybe." Then, in a moment that felt like the world holding its breath, Storm stretched his neck forward, his nose brushing the air just beyond the bars. He didn't touch Clara, didn't come closer, but the gesture was enough, a tentative offering, a crack in the wall he'd built to survive. Clara's throat tightened, tears prickling her eyes, but she kept her composure, knowing any sudden move could shatter this fragile bridge. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with pride. "We're going to be okay." Mia, still clutching the clipboard, let out a shaky breath. "I've never seen him do that," she said, her voice awestruck. "Not with anyone." Clara nodded, her eyes never leaving Storm. "He's just been waiting for someone to listen." She rose slowly, careful not to startle him, and turned to Mia. "Let's get those forms finalized. I'm taking him home tonight." As she spoke, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, a certainty that this was the beginning of something profound, not just for Storm, but for her. The dog who'd been called a ghost was no longer invisible, and Clara was ready to walk beside him into whatever came next. Clara Bennett stood in the flickering light of Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter's reception area, her hands steady as she signed the last of the adoption forms. But her heart raced with the weight of what lay ahead. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy coat and mismatched eyes, was hers now, his life spared just minutes past his scheduled euthanasia. The clock read 6:15 p.m., and the shelter's corridor still echoed with the restless barks of other dogs. But for Clara, the world had narrowed to the fragile bond she'd begun to forge with the trembling creature in Kennel K-12. Mia Torres, the young volunteer, hovered nearby, her eyes bright with relief. But the shelter's director, Mr. Larson, loomed at the desk, his expression a mix of skepticism and resignation. Clara knew the real obstacles weren't the forms or the adoption fee. They were the barriers of trust, fear, and bureaucracy that stood between Storm and a new life. Mr. Larson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he slid a final waiver across the counter. "Ms. Bennett, I need to be blunt. This dog is a risk. He's shown fear-based aggression, and his history, whatever it is, makes him unpredictable. Our policy requires a home check, references, and a trial period for cases like this. If he bites someone, or if you can't handle him, it's on you, and we don't take returns." His tone was clinical, a shield against the emotional weight of his job, but Clara caught the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe Storm could be saved. Clara's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice even. I've handled wolves that could tear me apart, Mr. Larson. I know risk. Storm's not aggressive, he's terrified. And I'm not here to return him. I'm here to give him a home. She signed the waiver with a flourish, her signature bold against the fine print. Larson's warning wasn't empty. She understood. The liability concerns, the shelter's overstretched resources, the pressure to prioritize adoptable animals. But she also saw what he didn't. The spark in Storm's eyes, the potential beneath his fear. She'd faced skeptics before in boardrooms and backcountry, and she'd learned to trust her instincts over their doubts. Larson sighed, handing her a copy of the paperwork. Fine, but you'll need to coordinate with a vet for a health check within 48 hours. And we'll need proof of a secure property. No fences, no approval. Clara nodded, already mentally mapping her ranch. 10 acres of open land, fenced for her horses, safe for a dog like Storm. She'd called Dr. Emily Carter, the local vet, who'd treated her mare last spring, to schedule an immediate visit. The logistics were daunting, but Clara thrived on challenges. They were the pulse of her work, the rhythm of her life. The bigger obstacle was Storm himself. Getting him out of the kennel and into her truck would test the fragile connection they'd just begun. Clara turned to Mia, who was clutching a worn leash. "Can you grab a slip lead instead? Something less threatening." Mia nodded, darting to the supply closet. Clara knew Storm's fear could make him bolt or freeze, and a standard leash might feel like a trap. She needed to move slowly, to honor the trust he'd tentatively offered. Back at Kennel K-12, Clara knelt again, the cold linoleum biting through her jeans. Storm hadn't moved, his body still pressed against the wall, his blue and green eyes, tracking her every gesture. Mia returned with the slip lead, and Clara took it, looping it loosely in her hands. "Okay, buddy," she murmured, her voice a lifeline in the chaos of the shelter. "We're going to take this one step at a time. No rush." She opened the kennel door slowly, the hinges creaking, and slid the lead inside, letting it rest on the floor. Storm's ears flattened, but he didn't growl, a small victory that made Clara's heart lift. For 20 minutes, Clara sat just outside the kennel, talking softly about the stars over her ranch, the way the wind sang through the sagebrush. She didn't force Storm to move, didn't pull the lead. Instead, she waited, her patience a bridge across his fear. Gradually, Storm's breathing slowed, his green eye softening. He inched forward, his nose twitching toward the lead, then retreated, testing the boundaries of this new reality. Clara's voice never wavered, her words a steady promise. "You're safe with me." Finally, Storm took a tentative step, then another, his belly low to the ground. He paused at the lead, sniffing it, his blue eye flicking to Clara's face. She nodded, barely breathing. "That's it, you've got this." With a hesitation that broke Clara's heart, Storm allowed her to slip the lead over his head, the nylon resting lightly against his neck. He froze, trembling, but didn't. "Pull away." Mia, watching from the corridor, whispered, "Oh my God," her voice thick with awe. Clara stood slowly, keeping the lead slack, and took a step toward the corridor. Storm didn't follow, his body rigid, but she didn't push. She waited, speaking, softly, until he took a single step, then another, his movements jerky but deliberate. The walk to the shelter's exit was agonizingly slow, each pause a testament to Storm's fear, each step a triumph of his courage. Clara felt the weight of every eye in the shelter, staff, volunteers, even other dogs, watching this unlikely pair. She ignored them, her focus on Storm, on the trust he was placing in her with every trembling movement. At the glass door, Clara paused, letting Storm adjust to the evening light spilling through. The Wyoming sky was a deep indigo, the first stars, piercing the dusk. "This is the start, Storm," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "We're gonna face the hard stuff together." She opened the door, and after a long moment, Storm stepped outside, his mismatched eyes wide, his body tense but moving forward. Clara's truck waited in the lot, its tailgate down, a blanket spread inside. The obstacles weren't over, vet visits, training, the long road to healing. But in that moment, as Storm took his first steps into a world that might finally be kind, Clara felt a spark of hope ignite. Clara Bennett eased open the passenger door of her weathered pickup truck, the Wyoming dusk wrapping the Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter's parking lot in a soft indigo glow. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy coat and heterochromatic eyes, stood frozen on the cracked asphalt, the slip lead loose around his neck. His blue eye caught the last light of the setting sun, his green one glinting with wary uncertainty. It was 6:30 p.m., and Clara had just navigated the first hurdle of bringing Storm out of his kennel, but the journey to her ranch, 10 miles, of open road and a new world for a dog who'd known only fear, was another challenge entirely. She kept her movement slow, her voice a steady anchor as she coaxed him toward the truck. This wasn't just a drive, it was Storm's first step into a life where trust might replace terror, and Clara was determined to make it count. "Hey, Storm," she said softly, crouching a few feet away, the gravel crunching under her boots. "This is our ride. It's going to take us somewhere quiet, somewhere you can breathe." She patted the blanket she'd spread across the passenger seat, its faded plaid pattern a small gesture of comfort. Storm's ears twitched, but his body remained rigid. His legs braced as if the ground might betray him. Clara didn't push. She'd seen this in wolves, creatures so attuned to danger that every new sound or scent was a threat. Storm's world had been a cage of noise and neglect, open space even. Freedom could feel like a trap. The shelter's glass door swung open behind them, and Mia Torres stepped out, her volunteer apron still tied around her waist. "Need help?" she asked, her voice low, as if afraid to startle Storm. Clara shook her head, offering a small smile. "We've got this. He needs to do it his way." Mia nodded, lingering at a distance, her eyes bright with the hope that had carried them through the last hour. Clara turned back to Storm, her patience unyielding. She spoke again, her words weaving a picture of what awaited. "There's a field at my place, Storm. Grass so tall it tickles your belly, and a porch where you can sit and watch the stars. No cages, no loud voices. Just us." The Wyoming wind stirred, carrying the sharp scent of sagebrush and the faint promise of snow. Storm's nose twitched, his green eye flicking toward the horizon, where the plains stretched endless and free. Clara watched him, her heart aching at his hesitation, but also swelling with pride. Every step he'd taken from the kennel to this moment was a victory, a defiance of the labels, unadoptable, aggressive, that had nearly ended his life. She shifted slightly, letting the lead slacken further, giving him the choice to move or stay. Minutes passed, the sky deepening to a velvet blue. Clara's knees ached from crouching, but she didn't care. She kept talking, her voice a lifeline. "I've got 2 horses, Daisy and Buck. They're gentle, but they'll give you space. And there's a creek where the water's so clear you can see the pebbles at the bottom." Storm's blue eye softened, his trembling easing just enough for him to take a single step toward the truck, then another. His movements were cautious, his body low, but he was moving, drawn by Clara's voice, or perhaps by some instinct that sensed safety in her presence. When he reached the truck's open door, Storm paused, his nose sniffing the blanket. Clara held her breath, resisting the urge to guide him. He needed to choose this, to feel the agency his life had lacked. After a long moment, he placed one paw on the running board, then another, his body tense but determined. With a final glance at Clara, as if seeking her reassurance, he leapt into the cab, settling onto the blanket with a soft thud. He pressed himself against the far door, his eyes wide, but he was in. Clara exhaled, a quiet laugh escaping her. "That's my boy," she whispered, climbing into the driver's seat with care. She started the engine, keeping the rumble low, and eased out of the lot, the shelter's harsh lights fading in the rearview mirror. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the plains, flanked by sagebrush and the occasional silhouette of a cottonwood tree. Clara glanced at Storm, who sat rigid, his mismatched eyes darting between her and the window. She didn't touch him, didn't crowd him. Instead, she kept up her gentle monologue, her voice a constant in his world of upheaval. "We're heading home now, Storm. It's about a 20-minute drive. You'll hear the wind out there, maybe a hawk or two. Nothing to be afraid of." As they left Casper's outskirts, The landscape opened up, the plains rolling under a sky now studded with stars. Storm's breathing slowed, his green eye lingering on the window where the world blurred past, open, vast, unlike the confines of his past. Clara noticed his ears perk slightly, a subtle sign he was taking it in. "See that?" she said, nodding toward the horizon. "That's yours now. All that space." She thought of her ranch, its weathered barn and sprawling fields, a place she'd built as her own refuge. Now it would be Storm's too, a sanctuary for a dog who'd never known peace. The truck's tires hummed against the road, the only sound beside Clara's voice and the faint whistle of the wind. She stole glances at Storm, marveling at his resilience. He was still afraid, still uncertain, but he was here, trusting her enough to sit in this unfamiliar space. Clara's chest tightened with a mix of responsibility and hope. This journey was more than physical. It was the start of a partnership, one that would demand everything she had. But as the ranch's dirt driveway came into view, marked by a simple wooden gate, Clara felt ready. She and Storm were in this together, and the road home was just the beginning. Clara Bennett's ranch came into view under the Wyoming starlight, a modest sprawl of weathered cedar and open fields nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. The truck's headlights swept across the barn and the fenced pasture where her horses Daisy and Buck dozed. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy black and white coat and heterochromatic eyes, remained pressed against the passenger door, his body tense from the journey from Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter. His blue eye glinted with wariness, his green one scanning the unfamiliar darkness. Clara eased the truck to a stop, the engine's hum fading into the quiet of the night, broken only by a distant coyote's call. This was home, but for Storm, it was another leap into the unknown. Building trust with a dog who'd known only neglect would be a slow, deliberate dance, and Clara was ready to take the first steps. She opened her door but didn't rush Storm out. "We're here," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm of someone who'd spent years earning the respect of wild creatures. "No hurry. You take your time." She stepped onto the gravel drive, leaving the passenger door ajar, the slip lead still loose around Storm's neck. The air was crisp, scented with sagebrush and pine, a stark contrast to the shelter's sterile tang. Clara moved to the porch, a wide covered space with a creaky swing and a stack of firewood, and sat on the steps, giving Storm space to decide. Her ranch was a sanctuary, but trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned moment by moment. Storm's nose twitched, catching the new scents: earth, grass, the faint musk of horses. His green eye flicked toward Clara, then back to the open door. Minutes passed, the stars brightening overhead. Clara pulled a worn field journal from her jacket and began reading aloud, her voice low and steady. June 12th, Yellowstone. Watched a lone wolf cross the Lamar Valley today. Moved like she owned the place, but her eyes kept checking the horizon. She was scared, but she kept going. She glanced at Storm, who hadn't moved but whose ears were tilted toward her. The words weren't for him to understand, but for the rhythm, the assurance that she was there, constant and unthreatening. The first night set the pattern. Storm didn't leave the truck until nearly midnight. Hunger or curiosity finally overriding fear. He leapt down, his paws hitting the gravel with a soft crunch, and darted beneath the porch, his mismatched eyes glowing from the shadows. Clara didn't chase him. She placed a bowl of water and high-quality kibble, recommended by Dr. Emily Carter, the vet she'd called earlier, near the steps and retreated inside. "Good start," she murmured, closing the door but leaving a crack for the night air. She'd sleep lightly, listening for him, knowing trust began with space. Days blended into a quiet routine. Clara rose at dawn, her boots scuffing the porch. As she set out food and water, always stepping back to let Storm approach on his terms, she tended her ranch, feeding the horses, mending fences, reviewing data from her latest wolf study, while keeping Storm in her peripheral vision. He stayed under the porch, emerging only when she was at a distance, his movements quick and cautious. His blue eye watched her chop wood, his green one tracked her as she weeded her small garden. Clara felt his gaze like a tether, a sign he was studying her as much as she studied him. On the third day, Dr. Carter visited, her vet truck rattling up the drive. A wiry woman in her 40s with kind eyes, she'd agreed to check Storm's health as part of Clara's adoption requirements. "How's our runaway?" she asked, setting her bag on the porch. Clara pointed to the shadows beneath. "Still camping out. He eats, drinks, but won't let me near him yet." Emily nodded, kneeling to peer under the porch. Storm's low growl rumbled, but she didn't flinch. "Skittish, underweight, maybe an old injury in that right hind leg," she said, standing. "He's not sick, though, just scared. Keep doing what you're doing. Patience is his medicine." Clara's evenings became their ritual. She sat on the porch swing, reading from her journal or talking about the ranch, the creek's babble, the way Daisy the mare snorted at dawn. Storm's eyes would appear in the dusk, closer each night, until one evening he lay just beyond the steps, his body stretched out, his green eye fixed on her. Clara's heart leapt, but she kept her voice steady, reading about a wolf pack's hunt. When she finished, she set a treat, a bit of cooked chicken, halfway between them and waited. Storm's nose twitched, and after a long pause, he crept forward, snatched it, and retreated. "Progress," Clara whispered, smiling into the dark. By the second week, Storm's territory expanded. He began exploring the yard at dawn, his patchy coat catching the light as he sniffed the fence line. Clara watched from the kitchen window, marveling at his cautious grace. He still flinched at sudden sounds, a slammed door, a hawk's cry, but he no longer bolted to the porch. One morning she sat on the grass a safe distance away and tossed a treat closer to her. Storm approached, his blue eye wary, and took it, lingering a moment before retreating. Clara's chest warmed. Each small act was a brick in the foundation of trust they were building. The breakthrough came on a chilly evening, the sky ablaze with sunset. Clara was on the porch sipping coffee when Storm emerged and lay at the edge of the steps, his head on his paws. She spoke softly. "You're starting to like it here, aren't you?" His ears flicked, and for the first time he didn't look away. Clara set her mug down, her heart full. Storm was no longer a ghost. He was becoming part of her world, and she was becoming his. The Wyoming autumn had settled over Clara Bennett's ranch like a golden veil, the sagebrush hills glowing under crisp October skies. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy coat and heterochromatic eyes, had begun to claim the land as his own, his cautious explorations expanding from the porch's shadows to the edges of the pasture. 3 weeks had passed since Clara brought him home from Sagebrush Haven Animal Shelter, and while trust was still a fragile thread, woven through patient evenings and quiet offerings of treats, Storm's wariness was softening. His blue eye no longer flinched at Clara's movements. His green one held a flicker of curiosity, but it was a sudden snowstorm, unexpected and fierce, that would mark the turning point in their bond, revealing not just Storm's capacity for joy but the depth of the partnership they were forging. The day began like any other, with Clara rising at dawn to tend the ranch. She fed Daisy and Buck, her horses, their breath steaming in the cool air, and set out food for Storm near the porch steps. He emerged as she retreated, his patchy fur ruffling in the breeze, and ate while watching her from a safe distance. Clara's routine, mending fences, analyzing wolf tracking data, kept her busy, but Storm was always in her thoughts. She noticed how he'd begun to linger in the yard, sniffing the grass or chasing a leaf, small signs of a spirit waking from a long sleep. Dr. Emily Carter, the vet, had confirmed his physical health was improving, weight gained, no serious injuries, but his emotional scars ran deep. "He's learning to feel safe," Emily had said during her last visit. "Keep giving him time." By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the northwest. Clara frowned, checking her weather app. A storm was forecast, but not this soon. The wind picked up, rattling the barn's tin roof, and within hours, fat snowflakes began to fall, thick and relentless. By dusk, the ranch was blanketed in white, the fields transformed into a pristine, glittering expanse. Clara, bundled in a shearling coat, stepped onto the porch to check on Storm. She expected to find him under the porch, his usual refuge, but instead he stood in the yard, his head tilted, sniffing the air. His blue eye caught the snow's faint glow, his green one wide with what looked like confusion or wonder. "Hey, Storm," Clara called softly, stepping down from the porch, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. She stopped a few yards away, giving him space. "First snow, huh? It's a bit early this year." Storm's ears flicked and he took a tentative step, his paw sinking into the powder. He froze, then lifted it, shaking off the snow with a quick flick, his green eye darting to Clara as if asking what this strange new world was. She laughed, a warm sound that carried over the wind. "It's okay, buddy. Just snow. Nothing to hurt you." Clara knelt in the snow, her breath clouding in the cold, and watched as Storm's curiosity took over. He placed another paw down, then another, his movements slow but deliberate. The snow dusted his patchy coat, clinging to the black tufts along his spine, and for the first time Clara saw his tail give a hesitant wag. He bounded forward a step, then stopped, his blue eye bright with something new. Delight. Clara's heart swelled. This was no longer the ghost dog who'd cowered in a kennel. This was Storm, discovering a world that could be kind. She stood, slowly, brushing snow from her knees, and took a playful step toward him. "Want to see what it's like?" she asked, scooping a handful of snow and tossing it lightly into the air. The flakes scattered, catching the last light, and Storm leapt, his jaws snapping playfully at the falling snow. He landed, skidding slightly, and looked at Clara, his green eye gleaming with an invitation. She grinned, her own caution melting away, and tossed another handful. Storm bounded after it, his movements clumsy but joyful, sending snow flying in glittering arcs. For the next half hour they played woman and dog in the snowy yard. Clara ran in slow circles, kicking up powder, and Storm chased her, his barks sharp and bright, the first she'd heard from him. He pounced on snowdrifts, his tail wagging furiously, and when Clara laughed, he darted to her side, nudging her, hand with his nose before skittering away. The contact, brief but deliberate, stopped Clara in her tracks. She knelt again, tears prickling her eyes, not from the cold, but from the weight of what this moment meant. Storm, the dog deemed unadoptable, was choosing joy, choosing her. "God, you're something else," she whispered, her voice thick. Storm paused, his head cocked, snow clinging to his whiskers. He took a step closer, then another, until he was just within arm's reach. Clara held still, her breath shallow, letting him decide. He leaned forward, his nose brushing her gloved hand, a gesture so trusting it felt sacred. Then, with a playful yip, he spun and leapt into the snow again, inviting her to join him. The snowstorm raged on, but for Clara and Storm it was a world of their own, a turning point that redefined their bond. The fear that had defined him was crumbling, replaced by a spark of playfulness that Clara vowed to nurture. As they trudged back to the porch, snow-dusted and breathless, Storm stayed close, his green eye meeting hers with a new warmth. Clara knew this was just the beginning. Trust would still take work and challenges lay ahead. But in that snowy yard, they'd found something unbreakable, a partnership forged in joy. The Wyoming winter settled over Clara Bennett's ranch like a quiet promise, the fields blanketed in snow and the air sharp with the scent of pine. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy coat and heterochromatic eyes, had transformed since that snowy evening a month ago when he'd bounded through drifts with Clara, his fear giving way to joy. His blue eye now held a spark of confidence, his green one a quiet trust that followed Clara as she moved through her daily tasks, feeding the horses, analyzing wolf data, stacking firewood on the porch. The trust they'd built was a foundation, but as November deepened, Clara began to see something more in Storm. An uncanny gift, a purpose that went beyond survival and hinted at a role neither of them could have anticipated. Storm's days were no longer confined to the porch's shadows. He roamed the ranch freely, his patchy fur catching the pale sunlight as he explored the pasture or trailed Clara to the barn. His movements were fluid now, the limp Dr. Emily Carter had noted nearly gone, his body filling out with proper nutrition. But it was his behavior that caught Clara's attention. He'd taken to watching Daisy and Buck, her horses, with a focus that went beyond curiosity. When Buck, the older gelding, grew restless one morning, pawing at the frozen ground, Storm didn't bark or shy away. Instead, he lay down a few yards off, his blue eye fixed on the horse, his presence calm and steady. Buck's agitation eased, his snort softening as he returned to grazing. Clara, watching from the fence, felt a prickle of awe. "What are you doing, buddy?" she murmured, sensing Storm was more than a pet. He was a peacemaker. The incident wasn't isolated. A week later, a neighbor, Tom Rivera, brought his injured sheepdog Maisie to Clara's ranch for advice, knowing her veterinary connections. Maisie, limping from a barbed wire cut, whined and snapped at Tom's attempts to soothe her. Storm, who'd been lounging by the porch, approached slowly, his green eye assessing. He didn't crowd Maisie, but settled nearby, his body low, his gaze steady. Maisie's hackles lowered, her whimpers fading as she mirrored Storm's calm. Tom blinked, incredulous. "I'll be damned," he said. "Your dog's got a knack for this." Clara called Dr. Carter that evening, her voice tinged with excitement. "Storm's doing something special. He calms other animals. It's like he knows when they're upset before anyone else does." Emily, ever practical, suggested a visit to observe. When she arrived, she brought a test. A rescue cat from her clinic, a skittish tabby recovering from surgery. The cat hissed from its carrier, but Storm, lying on the porch, simply watched, his blue eye soft. After a few minutes, the cat's hissing stopped, and it curled up, eyes half closed. Emily nodded, impressed. "He's got an instinct for de-escalation," she said. "I've seen therapy dogs do this, but Storm's a natural. You could train him for it." The idea of Storm as a therapy dog ignited something in Clara. Her work with wolves had always been about understanding connection between animals, ecosystems, even herself and the wild. Storm's gift felt like an extension of that, a bridge between his past pain and a future where he could heal others. She researched therapy dog programs, learning the requirements, basic obedience, comfort with strangers, and a temperament that could handle stress. Storm was still cautious around new people, his shelter days lingering in his flinch at loud voices, but his progress was undeniable. Clara saw a purpose for him, one that could give meaning to his survival and her choice to save him. Training began slowly. Clara worked with Storm in the yard, using treats to reinforce simple commands: sit, stay, come. His green eye followed her every move, eager to please, though he startled at sudden noises. She enlisted Tom's help, asking him to visit with Maisie to socialize Storm with other dogs. Storm's calm presence shone, his blue eye steady as Maisie romped around him. Clara also invited Mia Torres, the shelter volunteer, to the ranch. Mia, thrilled to see Storm's transformation, brought a gentle demeanor that put him at ease. When she knelt to pet him, Storm leaned into her hand, his tail wagging, a milestone that brought tears to Mia's eyes. As Storm's skills grew, so did Clara's vision. She imagined him visiting schools or nursing homes, his mismatched eyes, a beacon for those who felt outcast. The thought stirred memories of her own childhood, shuffled through foster homes labeled difficult. Storm's purpose was her redemption, too, a chance to prove that the overlooked could shine. She contacted a local therapy dog trainer, Sarah Klein, who agreed to assess Storm. During the session, Sarah watched Storm sit calmly as she dropped a book, a test of his startled response. "He's got potential," Sarah said. "His sensitivity is his strength. Keep building his confidence." By late November, Storm accompanied Clara on short trips to town, riding shotgun in the truck, his green eye scanning the world with growing ease. At a feed store, a child approached, drawn to his unusual eyes. Storm sat still, accepting a hesitant pat, his blue eye meeting Clara's as if seeking approval. She nodded, her heart full. Storm was finding his place not just as her companion but as a healer, his gift a testament to the resilience they shared. Winter tightened its grip on Clara Bennett's Wyoming ranch, the fields cloaked in frost and the air sharp with the promise of deeper cold. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy coat and heterochromatic eyes, had blossomed into more than a survivor. His blue eye gleamed with confidence, his green one soft with trust as he trotted alongside Clara, his therapy dog training progressing steadily. By December, he'd mastered basic commands and begun accompanying Clara on short outings, his calming presence drawing smiles at the feed store and local library. Clara's blog, a quiet chronicle of their journey, had gained traction online, shared by animal lovers and local news outlets. Storm's story, unadoptable dog to budding therapy hero, captured hearts, but it also caught the attention of a ghost from his past, threatening to unravel everything Clara and Storm had built. The trouble began with a phone call on a frigid morning, the ranch's kitchen warm with the scent of coffee. Clara answered, expecting Dr. Emily Carter with an update on Storm's latest vet check. Instead, a gruff voice introduced itself as Hank Grayson, owner of Grayson's Best Buddies, the puppy mill where Storm was born. "I saw your blog," Hank said, his tone clipped. "That dog you're calling Storm, he's mine. Stolen from my facility 2 years ago. I want him back." Clara's stomach dropped, her grip tightening on the phone. Storm, curled by the wood stove, lifted his green eye, sensing her tension. She forced her voice steady. "Storm was abandoned at Sagebrush Haven. I have the shelter's paperwork. He's legally mine." Hank's laugh was cold. "Paperwork don't mean much when it's my property. That dog's got my kennel's bloodline. I've got records and I'm filing a claim. He's worth money for breeding, especially now you've fixed him up." Clara's blood ran hot. She knew Hank's type, profit-driven, careless of the suffering his mill inflicted. She'd seen Storm's malnourished frame, his fear, the scars of neglect from that barn. "You're not getting him," she said, her voice low but fierce. "I'll fight this." Hank hung up with a warning, "See you in court." Clara stood frozen, the phone still in her hand, as Storm nudged her leg, his blue eye searching. Hers. She knelt, stroking his patchy fur, her mind racing. Hank's claim was a threat not just to Storm, but to the life they'd carved out, the ranch as sanctuary, Storm's budding role as a therapy dog, the bond that had healed them both. She couldn't let him be dragged back to a cage, used for profit until he broke again. Clara's past battles, divorce, loss, skepticism in her career, had taught her to fight for what mattered, and Storm mattered more than anything. She called Dr. Carter, who'd become a friend through Storm's care. "Hank Grayson's trouble," Emily said, her voice grim. "His mill's been dodging inspections for years. If he's got any proof, even flimsy, he could make this messy." Emily suggested gathering evidence of Storm's condition at the B shelter, photos, vet records, Mia Torres's testimony. Clara nodded, already dialing Mia, who was now a part-time staffer at Sagebrush Haven. "I'll dig through the files," Mia promised, her voice shaking with outrage. "Storm's not going back to that monster." Clara spent the day combing through her own records, adoption forms, vet bills, blog posts documenting Storm's transformation. She found a photo Mia had sent from the shelter, showing Storm's skeletal frame, his eyes haunted in kennel K12. It was a stark contrast to the dog now lying at her feet, his coat fuller, his gaze bright. She contacted Sarah Klein, Storm's therapy dog trainer, who offered to testify to his temperament and progress. "He's a miracle," Sarah said. "No court would send him back to a mill." Clara hoped she was right, but doubt gnawed at her. Hank's claim, however baseless, could exploit legal loopholes, and the thought of losing Storm was a vice around her heart. By evening, Clara sat at her kitchen table, papers spread out, Storm's head resting on her knee. She thought of her own past, the foster homes where she'd been a number, not a person. Storm had been a number to Hank, a reject to be discarded. She'd fought to give him a name, a purpose, and she'd fight now to keep him. She called a lawyer friend, Karen Wells, who specialized in animal law. Karen agreed to take the case, warning it could be a battle. "Puppy mills like Grayson's often have shady records," she said. "We'll need to prove abandonment and neglect. Can you get shelter footage?" Clara reached out to Mr. Larson at Sagebrush Haven, who, despite his initial skepticism, had softened towards Storm's story. He promised to check for security footage from the night Storm was dropped off. Mia texted later, triumphant. She'd found intake notes labeling Storm a stray possible feral, with Hank's name mentioned as the drop-off contact. It wasn't airtight, but it was a start. Clara's blog community rallied too, flooding her inbox with support and offers to fund legal fees. The outpouring reminded her why she'd shared Storm's story, not for fame but to show what love could do. As night fell, Clara stepped onto the porch, Storm at her side, his green eye catching the starlight. The threat loomed, but so did their resilience. She'd face Hank's claim with every tool she had for Storm, for the life they'd built, and for every animal still trapped in his mill. "We're not done yet," she whispered, her hand on Storm's head. His blue eye met hers, steady and unafraid, ready for the fight ahead. The Casper courthouse was a squat brick building, its walls steeped in the quiet gravity of small-town justice. Inside, on a brittle January morning, Clara Bennett sat rigid, in a wooden chair, her hands clasped tightly. Storm, the border collie mix with his patchy coat and heterochromatic eyes, couldn't be there, but his presence filled the room, his blue eye in Clara's memory, his green one, a beacon of the bond they'd fought to protect. Hank Grayson's claim to reclaim Storm for his puppy mill had escalated to this moment, a legal battle pitting Clara's love against his greed. The courtroom hummed with tension, but Clara's resolve, forged through months of building trust with Storm, burned brighter than her fear. Karen Wells, Clara's lawyer, had built a meticulous case. Mia Torres, now a fervent ally, had unearthed shelter records and grainy security footage, showing Hank abandoning Storm at Sagebrush Haven's night drop-off, his lie about a stray exposed. Dr. Emily Carter provided vet reports detailing Storm's malnourishment and fear-based trauma, while photos from Clara's blog contrasted his skeletal past with his thriving present. Sarah Klein, Storm's therapy dog trainer, testified to his gentle temperament, his gift for calming others. Clara's blog community had rallied, raising funds and awareness, their support a chorus against Hank's claim. Hank, slouched in a cheap suit, presented forged breeding records, claiming Storm was a valuable asset stolen from his mill. His arrogance faltered under Karen's cross-examination, which exposed his mill's history of violations, cages too small, dogs untreated for illness. The footage was the clincher. Hank's face, clear under the shelter's floodlight, as he shoved Storm's cage into the drop-off. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "you abandoned this animal, then profited from others like him. Your claim is baseless." She ruled for Clara, granting full ownership of Storm and ordering an investigation into Grayson's best buddies. The gavel's crack was a thunderclap of relief. Clara exhaled, tears blurring her vision. Hank's mill faced scrutiny, its closure imminent as inspectors uncovered rampant neglect. Clara's victory rippled beyond Storm, freeing other dogs to find homes. Back at the ranch, Storm greeted her with a joyful leap, his blue eye bright, his green one soft with trust. Certified as a therapy dog, he began visiting schools, his mismatched eyes a magnet for children who felt different. His calm presence soothed anxious students, his story a lesson in resilience. Clara's ranch became a haven for more rescues, each animal a testament to second chances. Clara, too, transformed. Storm's love had mended her guarded heart, teaching her to connect beyond the wild. Her blog, now a platform for advocacy, inspired thousands, shared by animal lovers worldwide. Evenings found her on the porch, Storm at her side, reading messages from readers moved by their journey. "You showed me broken things can heal," one wrote. Clara smiled, her hand on Storm's fur, the stars above mirroring the light in his eyes. Their story, born from a desperate shelter post, proved that even the most discarded spirits could find purpose, love, and a home that lasted forever.